Some of my favorite things to do in the summer is to hike and camp. I like to get out in the woods and just refresh myself and kind of just let all my stress go and come back feeling nice and revigorated. But these 10 subscribers share with me experiences that are more on the dark and creepy side. So, sit back, relax, and try not to get too scared of these really creepy encounters deep in the woods. If you have a story that you'd like to hear on the show, be sure to send it to the email that you can find in the description and pinned comment below. This one is a camping story from my younger years. Me, my brother, and aunt reserved a private weekend place beside a clean river, which was a great place for parties because it was deep in the woods. We stayed for 3 days, and we had a lot of fun. There was an event that changed our mind about this vacation on the 3rd day at night. We were all sleeping in one tent, so we felt pretty safe, and we usually fell asleep fairly quickly. But on this night, I had a bad feeling. That feeling when you know something is out of place. We also had a dog, and he was constantly listening to something. Something I couldn't hear. I was just lying there, barely awake, when I could just about hear a scream. It was a woman's scream. I was a kid, and didn't know what to do. I didn't wake my aunt up, so I just listened. There were a few screams, and I could tell they were coming from pretty far away. For about a half an hour, there was just silence. No animal sounds or anything. No screams. Just the river running and my heart pumping. I almost got back to sleep when something shot me awake, and my eyes were wide open. I could hear steps in the woods near our tent. These were definitely human steps, but the voices were strange. Like this person could manipulate the tone of the voice sounding almost demonic. By that point, my brother woke up and looked at me confused. I pressed my fingers to my lips to shut him up before he says anything. The steps drew closer as we almost shit ourselves. The steps stopped a few feet from our tent. There was a silence for a minute. I almost started crying when I could hear sniffing on the left side of my tent where my aunt was. I could just about smell this thing. It smelled like puke mixed with dog shit. It was awful. My aunt was a heavy sleeper and still asleep, so she heard nothing. We were frozen and scared out of our mind. We could hear the steps going back into the woods. Whatever this thing was, it sniffed, and then it was just gone. I was still scared out of my mind, because I knew that no animal could make that noise. They sounded way too human, but yet not human at all. Again, there was complete silence. And then it happened. A loud scream came from close beside my tent. My aunt woke up and looked at us pissing our pants. She looked very worried and confused, but she assured us it was only an animal. All of us knew better than that, as it still smelled like shit around the tent. We heard nothing for the rest of the night. My aunt was sitting up trying to get us to fall asleep. But nobody got any sleep that night. In the morning, we all packed up and got out of there as quick as we could. We looked around the tent and there were no footprints or anything. We told our aunt the story and wasted no time getting out of there. From that moment in my life, I knew there were things not many knew about. I'm no expert on what could have been, but it was definitely not human for sure. This story happened to me when I was hiking in the woods. It was about 3 a.m., so there was no light yet. There's rarely people up there, and there are no trails. It's mostly trees and hills and wild cows. I was walking down a hill, and I thought, why not do some exploring? So I decided to go down a few more hills until there was flat ground. I looked around and saw what looked like a trailer. I decided to go into it. I had my gun in my hand just in case some crazy bear or man tried to kill me. Anyway, when I was inside the trailer, I nearly threw up. It smelled like sulfur, but extremely bad. I walked further into it and saw a bed, a bag, and some books on black magic. Then I left because I couldn't stand the smell anymore. I left the trailer and continued walking. I came across a house. Well, maybe a little bit bigger than a house. I was like, why not go in here too? And so I went in. I saw the same books and I was kind of creeped out. Then I went up the stairs and was now on the second floor. I heard something move and I got a terrible feeling of bad energy. Then I decided to yell, for whatever reason, at whoever was up there, or whatever was up there. I said, "I know you're up there, motherfucker. Say something." But there was complete silence. I shot my gun through the roof and this time heard a scuffle. The sun had started rising now, so I decided it was my best option to leave. Before I left, I saw something written on the stairs. It said, "My house of spirits." I booked it out of the house, and then I felt the same feeling of being watched and scared. I turned around, and there was a man on the roof. He was staring at me. He had a long beard and long hair. He was smiling at me. I felt so disturbed. I shot at the man and yelled at him, but he kept smiling. I ran backward to keep an eye on him, and I booked it to my truck. I always see that man around town, but I guess he doesn't recognize me. A few years have passed and my father's friend knows him. He's always at the library. He gives everyone bad vibes and stuff like that, and I feel like I'm lucky to be alive. He was a devil worshipper, and he could have killed me, and no one would have even known where to find our car. Anyway, I won't be going anywhere near that house again.
About 2 years ago, on a summer day, my dad and I went for a quick hike on the hills that overlook our city. On the hills there are many reservoirs, many of which are surrounded by the woods of fir trees, and are places of great beauty and quiet usually. The particular reservoir we were hiking to provided us wonderful views of the city, and we knew the route well. However, since we had been hiking in the late afternoon, we only had an hour or so before dusk set in. We decided to walk fast. We trekked up the pebble path from the bump gate that loops around the reservoir. You can't actually see the water until you've scaled a small mound in front first. Well, Dad and I were nearing the mound, heading towards the water, when things got really strange. This man, probably in his 20s, was running barefooted and shirtless along the mound from one side to the other, back and forth, over and over again. I thought, that's odd. Yes, it was summer, but where I live, summer is not a guarantee of warmth. So, even though it was August, there was still a sharp chill in the air. Plus, we were quite a few feet up to the rush of winds, and have made it too cold to run half naked like this. Maybe he was doing it all for a thrill, or maybe he was hammered. We didn't stay long enough to find out. As we approached the water, a good distance from the odd runner, we could see the remnants of a fire ahead of some fir trees. Then ashes, sands were littered in strips of burnt foil, and realized there must have been some drug use here. We thought that might explain our runner friend over there. The man was utterly oblivious to us, so we passed by and he seemed harmless enough. But when we were behind the woods, climbing over the rocky pathway, we saw another man, stumbling and blinking like a drunk. His clothes were filthy. His general appearance was unkempt. He looked rough, and he'd probably been sleeping that way too. Perhaps he'd even been camping on the hills. I was a little uncertain, to be honest. This man stank of alcohol, seemed to be doused in stuff, and he was grumbling to himself as he lumbered by. I worried that he was drunk enough to give us a hassle, perhaps even follow us about. He looked at me oddly, in a way that made me extremely uncomfortable, and I just wanted him to get away from me. Thankfully, he passed us slowly without any issue. I started to breathe normally again, but I was still on high alert. When we came around the reservoir through another bump gate, we noticed that the runner was gone. I didn't understand this, as I'd only seen him 5 minutes ago or so I looked around and tried to spot the man himself or his clothes, as I was curious about him. He'd been acting really weird, like he was completely out of it. So I was peering through trees, trying to peek over the reservoir mound. I even looked behind me, up onto the hill, in case he had snuck by us and was climbing up and I didn't see him. We were passing through the gap between some trees, and I was looking into the woods to see if I could find the runner between the firs, but then I saw something and stopped. And not just something, but someone sitting amongst the trees with dark eyes and face. Eyes that glared at me. What the hell? I was close enough to see that the lurker was a man. His clothes were baggy and his hair was long. I couldn't see his face too well, but I could see his mouth open and I stared closely. It was like he was snarling at me, like a vicious animal. I was thinking to myself, what the fuck is he doing in the trees? He was crouching about 50 feet from us, quiet and alone. It occurred to me that he may have been the runner, but I soon realized that it couldn't have been the runner, because the runner returned, jogging along the mound about a minute later. The drunk we had passed had gone in another direction, and I hadn't seen anybody else up there, so it was really creepy to just see this person sitting there, lurking amongst the trees. I tried to pretend that I hadn't seen the creeper in the woods and continued walking. My heart rate was accelerating and my head gathered a cool sweat. The thought of him just watching us made me shiver. At least, my dad was with me. Walking back seemed to take an age, and my nerves made it difficult to move. I was tempted to look back round, but I didn't want him to know that I'd seen him, in case he'd panicked and took action. It was getting pretty dark now, and Mr. Lurker about twice as scary, so I wanted to get away from them all. All the weirdos, even the seemingly harmless ones. Back in the car, I told my dad about the man in the trees. He hadn't seen them. I don't know if my dad truly believed me. Perhaps he felt like I was exaggerating in the supposed malicious intent on the creep's face, but I swear he was scowling and snarling slightly at me. It was freaky. I'd never gone to this part of the hills late again due to this experience. It is truly a beautiful spot and I love going there, but I guess you could say it's pretty dodgy around dusk.
It all started when summer came, and me and my 3 friends, Lola, Katie, and Jennifer, were all planning to go camping. We were all excited and scared at the same time, because we were going camping alone. Lola asked her dad if he could drop us off. He agreed to take us. When the next day came, we started heading up. Lola's dad set up the camper we were using. "There's some blankets inside in case you get cold," he said before leaving. Lola's dad finally got in his truck and turned around. He stopped and rolled down his window and said, "No boys," to all of us, smiled to let us know he was joking, and drove off. There were 3 rooms in the trailer, 1 master bedroom and 2 bedrooms with bunks. Each room had a TV in it, so nobody cared about which room they got. Everyone knew that Jennifer didn't like small rooms, so we let her have the big room. I was in a room with Lola, and Katie was in a room by herself. I started unpacking when we heard a loud boom outside. "Lola, did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The boom?" "Yeah." We both looked at each other, startled, and then continued unpacking. But something seemed off. It was the fact that Lola was so chill about it. I was done unpacking, so I walked outside and started a fire. Jennifer walked out and asked if I saw it. I asked, "Saw what?" And then she started freaking me out. She was staring behind me, panicking. Her eyes darted back and forth, and then she calmed. I felt as if something was watching me, so I turned around. I saw an orb in the corner of my eye, reddish black, but by the time I turned to look, it was gone. I was so freaked out. I told Katie she could cook instead. We had our family's secret recipe of shepherd's pie and a bunch of vanilla cupcakes. There were about a dozen cupcakes left in the box, so we just left it on the table and went to bed. I could hear the TV coming from Katie's room, so I punched the wall and told her to be quiet. Right after I said it, everything went quiet, except for a small scream in the distance. It didn't sound human. It gave me chills that ran up my spine. I dozed off, but woke in the middle of the night from hearing someone in the kitchen. I woke up Lola, and we walked into the small hallway that led into the kitchen. I saw Jennifer sitting on the table, staring straight ahead. Something touched me. I jumped and realized it was just Katie, seeing what was making the weird sounds. Jennifer was really creeping me out. She never stared into space this often. But then I noticed something in the corner of my eye. It was a shadowy figure. It was staring right at Jennifer and slowly turned to face me and Katie. I froze. Katie froze. Jennifer then looked at us, as if being mind-controlled. Then, the figure ran out of the window, and Jennifer dropped her head to the table. We tried to wake her up, but ended up falling asleep. This experience still scares me to this day, and it's one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. Me and the others are still very close friends. We live together now, but we all remember that night and whatever it was we saw. It turns out Jennifer remembers seeing it in the daytime, but was out cold when the rest of us saw it. It freaks us out even more now, knowing that our friend wasn't even awake and staring into space, eyes wide open.
My friend and I live in southeastern Wisconsin, and we go Bigfoot hunting. My friend lives in a subdivision near some woods, and we go to an empty lot and throw rocks and bash logs on the side of trees. We never really had an encounter until we decided to stay late and possibly stay the night. It was about 10:30, and I was about 5 feet away from the edge of the forest, just throwing rocks. But I stopped as I heard something moving very slowly through the woods. The rustling stopped and a rock the size of a softball came flying towards me. It landed about 1 or 2 feet in front of me. I took this as a warning and yelled to my friend that we needed to go. We began sprinting towards our bikes when we heard it running through the brush. It sounded like a bear or something shaking the trees. As we rode our bikes away, my friend asked, "What the heck was that?" I was too scared to speak. My friend and I never slept that night. The next day, we did some research, and nearby there have been quite a few Bigfoot sightings. We know it wasn't a bear, because bears don't live this far south in Wisconsin. Some of you may not believe this, but just know, I'm not lying. This happened when I was 11 years old, which I'm now 13 and still remember clear as day. I basically lived in the middle of nowhere, so I didn't have many friends. There was this huge forest though, so I would play in that. One day, I went to go play. Now, it was almost around 6:30, so it was kinda dark. Now let me mention, I lived in Wisconsin at the time. I went deep into the forest, and everything was good until around 7. Now, I was used to hearing weird noises in the woods, but nothing like this. I heard this awful scream. It was not human-like either. It was so demonic that it scared me. I was a curious little girl, so of course I went to investigate. I got about a half mile in when I saw this non-human-like creature perched in a tree. Now, instead of running for my life, I froze in shock and fear, and before I knew what was happening, that awful smelly thing was right behind me. I just wanted to scream for help, but I didn't. I didn't know what the creature could do to me, so I stood there like a rock, hoping it would leave. It screamed again, but even worse than the first time, and I felt like I was gonna go deaf. Eventually, after minutes of this thing staring at me, it flew, and I mean it flew up into its tree. I stood there looking at it for what felt like hours. Now, I was gonna whoop out my phone and try to blind it with flash so I could make a run for it, and that's what I did. Now, did I mention I was a little chubby for my age, so I couldn't run so fast, and that sucked because the creature jumped up and ran after me through those woods. I felt the world spinning around me as I screamed for help, and the creature caught up with me eventually, and I felt like my life was over. I made a dash for the bushes, hoping to be able to hide in whichever one that I landed in. Now, I waited for at least a half an hour thinking he was gone, so I made a dash back to the back door, hoping that the thing wasn't behind me. Instead, he was perched on our air conditioning. I told my parents that very night, and they called me crazy, but I know what I saw, and I'm never going into those woods again. Monsters are real, and I don't know what that creature was, but who knows what he would have done if he got his hands on me. When me and my troublesome friends were 13 years old, one of the mischievous things that we did was every Saturday night was to go play Ding Dong Ditch. 10 years ago, we lived at the same block in a little suburban neighborhood. At the time, there was a lot less houses and a lot more woods. For privacy, I'm going to change my friends' names. There was Mark, James, and Matt. Mark and James were the ones to go and knock on the doors, and me and Matt, on the other hand, went and found hiding spots right away. We hit around 5 or 6 houses. I remember that all of the men that answered the doors gave pretty much the same reactions. They stepped up onto the stoop and yelled something or another. Then they'd walk back inside for a couple of minutes. And then we would go down a couple of houses and ring the doorbell again for a couple of reactions. One guy yelled that he was calling the cops, so we ran out of there as fast as we could. As I mentioned, 10 years ago in this neighborhood, there were lots of patches of woods where houses stand today. On the next block over, there were patches of woods surrounding some of the houses. The houses on this block seemed to be more unkept than the first houses on the block that was across the street where we were just at. We found a perfect hiding spot. The house was kind of run down, with tall grass and a ratty old car with a cover on it in the driveway. Overall, just a small house. Mark went to ring the bell. He barely made it across before a man about 6 foot tall and stocky built came out from the house. He wasn't like the other guys. This guy was angry immediately, and he walked around his whole front yard checking the bushes and screaming out threats. We all laughed as we all did, and eventually he went back inside. Mark waited a few more minutes, checked the windows, and then went up to the porch and rung the doorbell again. I didn't feel jealous with this house. I would not be bold enough to ring that man's door again. The door opened more quickly this time, and the man came out with a rifle. We all looked at each other and faced this terror. We all said, "Oh shit," under our breaths. The man checked the same places he had beforehand, and a few other ones this time, like behind his car and behind the trees. Then he went onto his lawn and just stood there for a few moments, paced it, and the guys started staring in our direction. We were all scared shitless. We ducked and hoped that he didn't see us. After 10 seconds of staring, he went inside his house and started looking out the window, standing like a statue looking our direction once again. We saw Mark creeping to the man's front door. There was nothing we could do, and we were too afraid to move or yell at him. Mark rang the doorbell once again, and ran for it. The man didn't move though, at least for another minute. Then he turned and walked away from the window. We didn't see Mark, or where he went off to. We were too nervous to move or say anything. Next thing I remember, we heard Mark's voice yelling across the street, "Run! We didn't understand at first until we heard someone running up from behind us, realizing, upon turning our heads, that it was the man from across the street pointing his rifle at us. We ran like little prey from a predator. Mark was waiting for us across the street. We heard a gunshot, and one of the bullets hit a tree that was right next to us. We lost him, and dove into the woods. We didn't report this guy or anything like that. We just told a few friends and that's it. We luckily were able to get away, and I'll tell you what, I'm never going ding-dong ditching, ever again. I live in a very rural part of Appalachia, and by very rural, I mean my nearest neighbor is a mile away. Now, I had never been one to believe in anything other than what's been scientifically discovered. I'm more of a logical man myself. At least I was. I was home alone one night. It was summer, as I remember the day had been scorching hot. I was 16 at the time and a cocky teenager, thinking I was Superman, and nothing scared me at all. I sat at home, since my parents weren't there, and wouldn't return for at least an hour. I sat there on my phone as I heard my Rottweiler going nuts outside, which was something new as she hardly ever really barked for an extended amount of time. I stepped onto our porch, and walked out into our yard, looking for what she was going on about, and saw every bit of nothing as I stood there. I was gazing at the sky, just looking at the stars and the moon and how it was really bright that night. That's when I heard the sound that sent chills down my spine and made my hair stand on end. This howling that started low, almost a growling noise, then it steadily got higher to the point that it sounded like a woman wailing. Now, I knew what my dog had been barking at. As I looked out our freshly cut hayfield, I could see the silhouette of a tall figure darting through the tree line. Its strides were carefully placed and almost robotic-like. It moved fastly, faster than any human ever could move. I bolted into the house and called my parents and told them to come home straight away, that this thing was right beside our house. Whatever that thing was, it knew I was there before I even saw it. I had nightmares for months about it. I heard stories about Bigfoot having a spiritual connection with the land, and had never believed in them until seeing this. After hearing it and seeing it, and having nightmares about the beast long after the encounter, I'm a true believer that something is always out there watching. I was camping last summer in a vast stretch of the Adirondacks. I'm big into the outdoors, hiking, and bushcrafting. I went on a hike one morning after breakfast. The sun was shining. It was a beautiful day. I was going a bit off trail to see what I could discover. I get to this pine forest and immediately smell this disgusting stench. I assumed there must have been a swamp or something dead nearby. I then started hearing grunting coming from one direction. I go closer for a look. At this stage, I'm waiting for a wild pig or something to come out. Instead, I see this large human figure next to a tree with its back to me. At first, I thought it may have been a hunter, but as I got closer, I see that this thing is huge and covered in hair. It was not human. I ducked down to get a better look and to make sure I wasn't seeing things. It was furiously tugging and scratching at something on the front of its lower body. It continued to grunt and also started to make some howling or moaning noise. It didn't seem human, but didn't sound like an animal. I had my phone on me, but I was way too freaked out to think. I crawled backwards, trying not to make a sound. As soon as I was out of those woods, I ran the whole way back to camp. We later packed up and went to a location a few miles away. I'm 100% sure that was a Bigfoot, and it was a terrifying experience to say the least. So, my boyfriend, our roommates, and I lived in western North Carolina. We like to spend a lot of time together and regularly go on outings as a group. One of our roommates is a huge towering guy who loves the outdoors and taking night hikes. One of his favorite places to go is the Linville Falls. But he experienced something terrifying every time he goes. At one point in the night, he was hiking the side of a trail that opens up to review a large empty field. Every time you walk past it, you get this horrible feeling of someone staring at you maliciously. Now, like I said, my friend is a big bearded guy. He has no fear. He picks up snakes with his bare hands and goes hiking by himself at 3 in the morning. But when he passes this area, he becomes so afraid that he cries. Further up the path, it feels like someone is walking behind you and has joined the back of the group. Recently, we all tried to go together, but some really odd things happened that made us feel like we shouldn't go, so we didn't. What I'm wondering is if anyone else has been to that area and experienced this. Does anyone know about the history of that area? I know that Pisgah region was home to a lot of tribes, and that may have something to do with it. Also, if anyone would like to know more about this, let me know. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and share it on your social media to help the swamps continue to grow. If you have a video topic you'd like to suggest, feel free to comment it down below. I would love to see your suggestions. If you have a story you'd like to share and hear on one of these videos in the future, send it to the email that you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone in the swamp here. If you guys enjoyed Edge of Night's narration on story number 3, please give him a subscribe and show him some support. He reads great stories all the time.